Evening and welcome to our experts and participants to the online citizens dialogue called Europe in the Neighborhood. Let's talk about, or beyond borders, I should say, with subtext, the struggle for European integration in the Western Balkans. A dialogue which is organized by the non-partisan Europa-Union Deutschland in cooperation with the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, Dialogue Southeast Europe, and the Center for European Policy Studies, or CEP, in Brussels. The Citizens Dialogue is recorded and will be published on YouTube after the event. For anonymous participation, please feel free to change your name displayed in the settings by going to the cogwheel symbol. My name is Blockmans. I'm Director of Research at the Center for European Policy Studies, CEPS, in Brussels, and my main hobbies or research priorities rather are on the EU's relations with its immediate neighbors in the Western Balkans, broader Southeast Europe, and indeed Western European countries. I should acknowledge at this stage the sponsors already mentioned, Europa-Union Deutschland, which since 2014 has been conducting citizens' dialogues on current European policy issues throughout Germany. Today's dialogue on the Western Balkans is the first of a new three-part series of citizen dialogues on EU enlargement. There's also Europe in the Neighborhood. Let's talk beyond borders, which is graciously funded by the Auswärtiges Amt and the Presse- und Informationsamt der Bundesregierung. We would like to thank our sponsors for their financial support for enabling today's event. The next two citizen dialogues of this series will be on EU accession of Ukraine in July and on Georgia's European integration in. At this point, we also like to express our sincere thanks to all the long-standing partners of the Citizens Dialogue of Europa-Union Deutschland, who once again contributed significantly to this event, and you see them here on the slide mentioned. A couple of technical remarks before we go forward. Everyone should be able to see the three experts, myself as moderator, and also the PowerPoint presentation, which is operating in the background. Participants are not connected with a picture, and they're, for the time being, also muted. Of course, it can change when you enter into the dialogue. But in case of technical problems, the first aid rule is to log in again by the access link. And for further technical questions, write to the technical team via the Q&A button. I mentioned there's three possibilities to actively participate in this dialogue. One, communicate questions, concerns, or positions in writing. We ask you to use your smartphone, your tablet, or second internet window on your computer to call up the website slido.com and enter the code hashtag EUD, capitals EUD after a hashtag. We will explain this again in a moment, so you don't need to memorize the code right now. On Slido, you can submit questions, written questions, and then upvote others' questions. So you get a bit of a dynamic going there. The second possibility to actively participate in the dialogue is via polls and votes, which are also taken via Slido. In the app or online, you can switch at the top of your screen between the Q&A area, where you can post questions, and polls that we have prepared. You will see them, and I will announce them as we go along. The third way is to actively ask questions on Zoom. And so if you want to speak or ask questions directly to our experts, please refer to the hand symbol at the bottom center of the bar. We will try to incorporate your statements into the questions during the course of the event. And after I've called your name, the technical team will activate your microphone. Then you can unmute yourself and speak to the audience. So do not forget to unmute yourself. Now, if Slido does not work for you, in exceptional cases, a question can also be transmitted via the Q&A button on Zoom, and the technical team in the background will pass on the question to me if possible. Okay, these are the technical remarks. Then the topic. We've seen, of course, that the Western Balkans have been stagnating on their track to the European Union. It is exactly 20 years ago that at the Thessaloniki summit, a promise was given by the EU, its member states, that one day the Western Balkans would be integrated into the European Union. To most, that's a generation ago. Kids have grown up and still the promise is not being delivered upon. Of course, small steps have been taken. Some states of the Western Balkans are negotiating their accession to the European Union. Others still have to start. With a raft of conditions being posed, some by individual member states, hijacking the political process within the European Union to advance candidate countries to the next stage in their pre-accession track, but sometimes also by Western Balkan countries themselves who start to backslide on some of the fundamentals for EU membership, rule of law, respect for democracy, freedom of the press, etc. In this conundrum, we've seen, of course, a major boost being given by the enlargement perspective or process of the European Union by the membership applications of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia shortly after the Russian invasion into Ukraine in February of last year. These membership applications were very quickly dealt with by the European Commission in a preliminary assessment on the readiness of these countries to engage into membership negotiations with the European Union. And upon a positive assessment by the European Commission of the answers provided by the governments of these three Eastern Partnership countries, the decision was taken by the heads of government and state of the member states in the European Council of June last year, so a year ago, to grant candidate country status to Ukraine and Moldova, whilst offering a European perspective to Georgia. And those three membership applications and grantees have all been attached also with a number of conditions that will be considered tomorrow in a General Affairs Council before the European Council again looks at these issues. For the Western Balkans, at first there was apprehension, of course, about the three new candidates or kids on the block. Apprehension that the geopolitical momentum around the war in Ukraine might lead the European Union to allow some leapfrogging over the heads of the Western Balkan countries to take place. I think these fears have subsided by now, but still the process itself needs to be streamlined in order to facilitate in a more gradual manner the integration of pre-accession states as they move along the negotiation track with the European Union. And this is what I think is referred to in the rather dramatic sounding subtitle of the event, the struggle that many of the Western Balkan country leaders as well as populations feel in their quest to join the European Union. Overall, public support is still rather high, but it has been declining again across the board over the number of years. So what is the state of affairs here? What should be done in order to speed up the process for those that move on merit towards the European Union? How can also citizens' concerns be better accommodated, and can they feel the benefits or reap the benefits that gradual integration into the European Union might offer them. What are those benefits and when might they be reaped? Those are some of the questions that we'll be engaging our experts in discussion, of course, with also the inputs of our online audience through the three ways of contribution into the debate. I think we're indeed very pleased to have a very knowledgeable panel with perspectives from politics and civil society present with us today. But before presenting the experts, I would like to get the first warm-up question on Slido for the participants, just to see whether indeed you found the right button and we get to see your answers. So a very simple warm-up question. What country are you joining us from today? So please enter your answers on Slido. You see the word map growing on the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, with that, a presentation of the experts here with us around the virtual table. Manuel Sarrazin, who's a special representative of the German government for the countries of the Western Balkans. Welcome, Manuel, zooming in from the Baltic Sea region. We have Dr. Simonida Kacarska, Director of the European Policy Institute in Skopje, North Macedonia. Simonida, good to see you again. And last but not least, Harun, Cero, who is Project Manager and Research Fellow for EU Enlargement and Security at the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation Dialogue, Southeast Europe in Sarajevo. Harun, welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
Now, let me see again the word map on, well, we saw the word map clearly show Germany quite prominently, then in equal measure, it seems France, Belgium, Western Balkan states, primarily Albania, North Macedonia. Simonida, you've brought your fan club, it seems. Poland also, Belgium just grew a little. Okay, it's nice to see that there are people both from founding states of the European Union, states that have joined in 2004 with the Big Bang enlargement and can provide their inputs from their more recent experience, and then of course countries, candidate countries from the Western Balkans and the South, and I see it also from Montenegro. That's great to have such a nice geographical. All right. Before we move into the open discussion, we will have our first voting question, a real voting question on Slido. But first of all, I would like to encourage you to announce your requests to speak via the hand symbol. We will then draw a list of speakers and call you around 6:30 to address your questions or remarks collectively to our three experts. The first question is on the topic and concerns your opinion on the EU integration of the 6 Western Balkan countries. Is it very important? Should accession happen as soon as possible? Is it something more for the long term? Currently, there being too many obstacles, both in the EU as well as the Western Balkans, or are the Western Balkan states actually not welcome? They should not join, but another cooperation format ought to be found. Those are the three choices you can make. I would like to ask a similar question to our experts. How optimistic are you about the 6 Western Balkan states joining the European Union? Manuel, can we start with you?
Well, Stephen, first I have to say that I'm of course biased because there is this German word which is called Zweckoptimismus. Can somebody translate that? So optimism for purpose or of purpose, and I would say I don't see any other tool which the European Union has, which is anyhow far from being so influential and successful as enlargement was and is. So, although given that we see recent weaknesses of enlargement, I would not confess, or only halfly confess, because believing is a part of the success of enlargement. Although it seems to be technical, it is a question of believing as well. So I would try to spread German Zweckoptimismus. We don't have any other tool to reach our foreign policy goals in the region, so we will reach them. The opposite would be only that we're going to fail, and then we can just stop and sit down crying, and that's not the German government's pursuing it. Second point is perhaps for you relevant. This believing, it's not only me who is like the guy dealing with the region like for monthly payment. This believing is also existent in the mind and in the hearts of Chancellor Scholz and Foreign Minister Baerbock, as of the whole traffic light coalition of Germany. So if you're searching for believers, you find them in the strongest member state in European Union. I know there will come a lot of critical points and a lot of skepticism, but this is not such a bad start, I would say.
Okay, Simonida, are you optimistic about North Macedonia or the other six, the other Western Balkan states joining the European Union?
If Manuel is an optimist for purpose, I think in order to where I come from, I have to be an optimist. It's my job description. Being in this for so long, I have less optimism than I did in 2004, for sure. But I cannot say that I'm not an optimist, because going back to what was said, I think that the believing also on our side that the job can be done, or that we can complete a cycle of membership for after 20 years, then I think it's essential for the purpose and the value of our own work, but also to materialize the support that the European Union integration has actually experienced in the region, and that has been, especially in countries such as North Macedonia, after all of the hurdles, you still have these 70% of the population that say that they would vote yes. So I think that in that sense, it's our responsibility to be optimists. Although I was looking, I think that we are all a bit biased here, and also the sample is probably biased. I looked at some of the participants, and these are people that know and value and appreciate European integration, so we might be aware of that. That includes myself. But having said that, unless we actually move on a bit quicker than what we have in the past, unless we actually manage to get more people, in addition to optimism, to do the work of enlargement, then I think there will be less optimists at the end in the next 20 years.
Yeah, thank you, Simonida. Indeed, we might be a bit biased here, but so maybe, Harun, if you allow me, let me twist the question a little bit more. Why, assuming that you're optimistic about this as well, is that correct? Yeah. So can you then say a bit why it is important for the six Western Balkan countries to integrate?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I mean, I'm optimistic when I see this pool. It's like 69, almost 70% think that it's very important. The accession is, and the country should access as soon as possible. But I mean, jokes aside, as Simonida said, probably most of the participants here are maybe a bit biased. But I'm also I would say I am an optimist. So I think that things are moving very, very slowly, but that they're in fact moving. I mean, as you mentioned, it's been 20 years exactly since the Thessaloniki summit, and partially it is true if we say, that this time was kind of a time of lost opportunities and disappointed illusions in some sense. But I mean, back then it was still believed that there were voices within the EU, or more voices that supported, the accession of all Western Balkan 6 countries in one package, but at the end, the regatta principle, unfortunately, prevailed. I'm still kind of, I would like that it would have developed different, but this is not the case. And I mean, when you read the declaration, the Thessaloniki Declaration, you see words such as considerable progress of all Western Balkans countries, improved good neighborly relations, etc. And in these days, when you read the various summit and country reports, you don't usually see that much of or that amount of positive formulations when it comes to the reports. So this kind of shows also that this positive momentum we had back then wasn't used properly, I mean, from both sides, both the Western Balkan 6, but also the European Union. So we have to ask ourselves what went wrong. I mean, just maybe very briefly for this first round. You have you have to differentiate also between the Western Balkans countries. Of course, it's important for each country in the Western Balkans to be a part of the European Union, not just because of the prosperity, but also because of good neighborly relations, regional stability, also in some sense security. I mean, but we will get to these topics later on. But what I wanted to say is that I'm not kind of I'm not in favor of taking the Western Balkan 6 as a group. You have different stages, you have different countries. You have some countries where the political leadership is basically pretending to want to join the EU, but basically doesn't want this, and it isn't the case. You have other countries where where they grew up, quote unquote, with fundamentally illiberal systems, which don't really allow them to pace up or to integrate more on a bigger level or pace. And you have countries where you don't have the political will, basically. So I will end with this, but it's basically very important for each country to integrate at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Harun. I mean, this is a perfect segue into our second question to the audience, which is an open question in Slido. So you can write your opinion there as to what the major political and economic challenges are for the integration of the Western Balkans into the European Union. So you have there the text box in Slido where you can write your opinion as to what the major political and economic challenges are for integration of the Western Balkans into the EU. I would like to ask the same question to our three experts, again, starting with Manuel, and we will take, of course, the results of the survey into account as some of the answers come online. Manuel.
Well, I think that's the main point, is that the geopolitical momentum is so often called. And I remember I was sitting with President Zelensky and Robert Habeck in May 21 in Zelensky's office in Bankova Street in Kiev. And I remember quite exactly, Simonida, I think I told you the story already, but I'm so often in Skopje in the moment that everything I told already to Simonida. So Zelensky said, like, if you're blocking a country like North Macedonia, becoming even opening the negotiations, how shall ever Ukraine become a member of European Union? I think from today's view, this is a quite significant statement from that time. So we have the momentum that Ukraine brought back the reality of the geopolitical might and necessity of enlargement to the minds in the European member states, even in France, and regarding Ukraine, also even in Germany. But I think the main rules of geopolitical momentum game are not played well in the Western Balkans in general. I think that a lot of actors in the Western Balkans are trying to play for time or believing they have time, instead of being aware that in the moment when the war ends, and it can take a very, very long time, but it can also be faster over than one might think. Everything might be very, very fast. And you have to be prepared, not only regarding the acquis, also the political decision to be fast and clear has to be prepared. And it would be really miserable if Western Balkans are not upfront with this decision. You are now in Sarajevo, Stephen, you told us. And if you remember what has been done in the Baltic states between 1988 and 1991, in this 3 years phase of coming to restorage of independence, one thing was since then, strategy of all 3 Baltic states, integrate as fast as possible in whatever is there to integrate. I remember quite exactly when the Baltic states tried to join the Euro and Estonia was first. The main argument was never currency policy or economics. It was, when we are a Euro country, we will be more safe from attacks from Russia. And this, you know, using the momentum has to be prepared, being able to, in the moment when the real momentum comes, having also the mindsets of the people for strict and strong decisions. And I think that this is in the moment a bit getting lost in the region among the leaders, perhaps sometimes also from us. I don't want to only finger point at the region, would be too easy. This would be my main aspect, Stephen.
Right. Simonida, major political and economic challenges for the integration of North Macedonia and other Western Balkan countries into the EU. I'm
looking at the responses, but for example, the first thing that comes to my mind is actually that we have been, both the EU and the Western Balkans, in the context of its accession, have been victims of complacency, of a decade-long period in which it was comfortable for the Union, because of its own internal problems, to have a stagnating region that was actually acceding, a region that also realized that the signals from the EU were not positive, so there was no actual pressure to reform in a substantive manner. So I think that what we are witnessing now, in light of this new geopolitical momentum, is actually a challenge of how to overcome this complacency, how to once again stir reform, which is at the core of the European accession process, but also to start and to understand this, I would not say promise, I would more say perspective of membership more seriously, because there was a period of we are witnessing this year, we experienced the 10-year anniversary of Croatia's EU membership. And this also, in the EU's context of enlargement policy, has been one of the longest periods, if not the longest, in which the EU has not actually experienced enlargement in history. So I think we are also experiencing the effect of the EU unlearning enlargement policy, and also the region unlearning how to do enlargement. In my view, we are victims of a decade of stagnation, and we are yet to find out how to actually overcome the many political challenges which have been aggravated as a result of this decade of stagnation, which includes all of these factors that were mentioned by the audience, such as corruption, such as authoritarian tendencies in the region, the economic divergence instead of convergence, whilst the Union was actually moving forward. This, in my view, have been the effects of after the EU's economic crisis, and largely the last meaningful exercise that we ever saw on EU enlargement in the region was the 2009 and 10 visa liberalization process. After that, until the Russian invasion, we've been, I think, victims of complacency on both sides.
Right. Harun?
Yeah, I mean, I would, agree on everything what Simonida and Manuel have kind of told us. I would say, like, I repeat. So, for me, the biggest problem is that in the most of the countries in the Western Balkans, the leaders are basically, are the biggest problem, who really don't want the accession, or not, maybe not in every country, but let's say in 50% of the countries, the leaders are the problem, who basically their end goal isn't accession, but it's pretending that they want this, but actually that wouldn't contribute to their endeavor of doing corrupt businesses and earning money by that. So basically there are a few stages. I mean, of course, as I mentioned, in some countries there are structural problems besides those political. So basically, besides the politicians or the establishment, there are structural problems on going forward with the EU integration. I mean, Bosnia is a good example. We have, I won't go into depth. I know that not everybody's that much into EU integration and the technical stuff, but in Bosnia Herzegovina we have this mechanism which is called the coordination mechanism, and we already know. I mean, it's kind of from bottom to the top approach on various government levels to kind of how do you say, to balance out the EU integration process and kind of agree with every level before you get to a decision on a step or a law, etc. And this is basically a huge problem because it's very slow. It's only it's a major question how we're going to open like chapters or clusters 23 and 24 with this coordination mechanism. It's not possible. But not to go with so much into depth with these technical stuff. So basically, I would agree with also with the participants, with other participants, that rule of law, the citizenship doesn't trust the courts. The courts aren't coordinating or working together enough to catch some big fishes, quote unquote. We didn't have in the region, in the Western Balkans 6, that big of corruption, kind of imprisonments or something. We didn't have big cases that big cases until now, such as it's the case with Croatia back then, and with Ivo Sanader, the prime minister. Public administration, very slow, very bureaucratic. Education reform, brain drain. I mean, the best experts, the best brains are leaving the region, and there's no circular migration. So these people aren't coming back. But this is everything what we hopefully will improve with this, when we kind of somehow engage more in the EU integration, and when we become hopefully someday members. So like I said, it's a structural problem. So there are degrees, there are levels of problematic issues which have to be dealt with. So it's not just political and economic, but it's just there are layers to it, basically.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Harun, and indeed all of our experts. We'll turn to our audience members right now. I see that Ilir raised his hand. Before I get to Ilir, I wanted to ask the most popular upvoted question in Slido to Manuel. You have the overview of all Western Balkan countries and the perceptions of populations in those countries about EU accession. Can you give us the current state of affairs as to public perception about EU membership in those Western Balkan countries? Is there a change of opinion since February 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
Well, first, as better as you know the Western Balkans, as more you are in danger of losing the overview, actually. But sometimes also perhaps a good overview is not helping on the Western Balkans, because the devil lays in the details, and in the Western Balkans even the details have a devil called detail quite often. you can say a lot on this. I would say one thing. I fear that with certain interest also managed, the question of the perception on the war in Ukraine is used or might become a major part of splitting the Serbian population apart from believing in European Union and belonging to us. And I don't think that this is like genuine inside Serbian population, quite opposite. But the split of perspectives from the Serbian public opinion, especially from the Serbian media landscape, to ours, I know which is true, but to say it like, to try to make it in a kind of objective statement, this is, I think, the most dangerous development, not only regarding Serbia, also regarding neighboring states, where some would call it Serbian influence, some would call it like Serbs looking or orienting towards debates in Belgrade, can be also both. But this would be my answer. Yeah. So everybody would have thought that I say now, yeah, this horrible war helps us to get more hope into European Union. I think in a lot of countries this is also true. But I think still this usage of the perception on the reality of the war in Ukraine in Serbia to split the society apart and to split parts of the society extremely from us. This is very sorrowing me.
Right. Okay. Simonida, Harun, maybe later during the conversation, you can also point to public perception trends in your own countries, but I'm keen to bring the audience in, and Ilir has been waiting for a while. So Ilir, you could unmute yourself and pose your question to one or all of the experts. Now's the time.
Hello, good evening, and thank you very much for the invitation to be part of such a very interesting debate and discussion here. I would like to say that we can. I see the questionnaire, and I see that we can blame EU, Serbia, everyone we can blame, but we have to see to ourselves. I am from Albania, and in my perspective, the whole situation is that we have an extremely old and corrupted elite, political elite, which doesn't want to be integrated in EU because they will lose the power and financial profits that the power is bringing to them. And this is the whole thing, in my view. I have been very optimistic 21 years ago when I finished College of Europe and I was coming back in Tirana in Albania. But a year later, after I saw the reality, what is going on in Albanian politics and in Albania in general, I started to be a real pessimist of the situation. The thing is that I am more optimistic because I see that EU is investing a lot in judicial reform in Albania and is pushing hard to, as Harun was mentioning, to get the big fish. If it will happen, then I am sure that the things will change. The only thing I would like to ask or to say, or I can blame EU until now, is that stability cannot prevail democracy. So that's the only thing that we could ask EU to don't do that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilir. Simonida, the fellow graduates from the college, perhaps you feel inclined to to respond also from your own perspective.
I'm a UK alumni, so not the college, but I think I do know Ilir. Our paths have crossed, so it's a pleasure to hear him virtually. I'm a bit wary of the use of the word blame, because I think that, you know, the outcome at the end of the day, it's the region is the one that's suffering. What we have learned also from the previous enlargement is that the EU can't transform societies by itself. So there needs to be a change, a democratic change within a society, and the EU can lock in positive effects. But if the trends are, but this is in the conditions of an actual viable membership perspective or a credible membership perspective. So now there's a lot of conditions that were not fulfilled in the Western Balkans, starting from the credible membership perspective, so that actually one can expect a domestic change. On the other hand, there is the question, could we have done this ourselves? Could the region have done a lot of things without the push from the European Union? And I'm also not very certain here, because I find it difficult to find examples in recent history of countries that have done this transformation without the viable or the credible membership perspective. What we have experienced in the European space, and you're sitting in Estonia, and the good examples, was actually also a push from the European Union with a credible membership perspective to do a lot between 97 and 2004. We will have a much more difficult path, especially as we have been stuck in these path dependencies that Ilir mentioned. In these corrupt elites, they have had much more longer period to actually ingrain in the system. But unless there is a change from within, supported from the European Union, then I don't see any change for the next generations either. We can either close this sentence now, or we can think of ways in which possibly a drive for democracy from below can be sustained, because that's the only response that one can give to the rather bleak picture that I partly subscribe to.
Thanks, Simonida. I'm eager for other participants also to take the floors and to follow Ilir's example by raising their hand in Zoom. That's in the banner of the Zoom window that you have in front of you. But absent such volunteers as of yet, I go back to Slido. And this was also prevalent in some of the responses to the open question that was posed earlier on. Harun, you spoke a little bit about different levels, systemic, structural levels of obstacles. Endemic corruption, of course, has been mentioned time and again, but there's also a question in Slido that makes a link with the complicity by EU actors in such corrupt and criminal engagements in the Western Balkans. It is sometimes half jokingly said that corruption in the Western Balkans starts in some of our existing member states, Vienna and other places. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, in the last couple of days, I was kind of thinking about, this realpolitik approach, or this political realism, not just, which we can see in the last couple of months, but also before. I mean, the European Union hasn't also done herself a favor by working also with those kind of corrupt elites within the Western Balkans. So I mean, when you look at it, from this side, I would say that when you have meetings behind closed doors without involvement between the EU officials and the these politicians, when they meet at lunches in restaurants behind closed doors without the involvement of the media, the civil society, etc., where they are negotiating behind, nothing comes out behind closed doors. I don't say that, the negotiations which are taking place, or, on rather, complicated political issues, which we can see in the Western Balkans. So it isn't, it's not always good, to have these things out in the public. I completely agree with that. But, when it comes to some questions, then it's obvious that there's a lack of prosperity on both sides, and telling something when talking to the public, when talking to the media, or saying one thing and then saying different things behind closed doors. I mean, that's also kind of a double-faced approach. And I mean, of course, it's not always easy. I have kind of the impression, that also from the side of the European Union, sometimes the easier path is chosen, and not basically the more vulnerable actors are kind of put into the spotlight and are kind of pushed more because they're volatile, or they're kind of targets that they are easy targets. So basically I think this approach of kind of not always going the easy way, but trying to deal with real problems or real actors that are the biggest problems for the whole political being of the Western Balkans. I think that's a major issue on the EU side. And as you said, Stephen, of course, I'm not keen on blaming the EU, as Simonida said, just the EU, but we have to put some things on the table and say how the things are going. And realpolitik, I think in these times when we have the Russian aggression in Ukraine and political developments all over the world, from China, Taiwan, Iran, Israel, etc., lots of bilateral, multilateral conflicts. I think that this isn't the time for Mensheimer and like theorists and theories who are directed in that way. So we have to get back to the basics, institutionalism, and try to be also a bit of idealist.
Right. Manuel, I would like you to get ready on the Kosovo questions that are posted on Slido, but I'll give you, a minute or two still to reflect on those, because in the meantime, Clive Hall has raised his hand and would like to come in. So if you could unmute yourself, Clive, and then pose the question or make your observation.
Okay, I'm a European. And I have to say that I myself have been rather nervous about Western Balkans. I visited Macedonia, and that seemed to me quite all right. But when you look at Serbia, when you look at Georgia, when you look at Bosnia, all right, I say to myself, surely you need to, these countries need to vote in pro-European parties, all right, that the majority should be pro-European. Now, if we take Serbia, we've still got a person, I think he was the propaganda chief during the dreadful massacres that were taking place in Serbia in the past. It's not exactly terribly inspiring for people. And I think you mustn't forget there's going to be public opinion. You've got to think of the remaining Europeans. It's like saying, fine, myself, I'm all for having countries in the EU. I'm very pro the EU, but it's like having neighbors. Do you feel comfortable with the new neighbors? Do you think that they are going to be able to respect your laws? Are they going to be reasonably honest? For instance, I look at Hungary and I say to myself, goodness me, what a disaster it's been having a country like Hungary. And we don't want to have another 6 Hungaries on our plate. So please, can you tell me, unless I'm being very naive, why isn't it that you have that you don't have more pro-European governments in charge in these countries if the people themselves are so pro wanting to join the EU? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clive. I feel instinctively this is a bit more a question perhaps with Simonida, but Manuel, I don't want to, maybe we'll go with Simonida first, and then Manuel, you want to reflect on this as well, but I'm also curious for your answers on the Serbia-Kosovo question. Simonida.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Clive, for the question. It's a very pertinent question, definitely. I myself come from Macedonia, so I start from North Macedonia, so I'll start with that example actually, and I think that will bring us that can bring us to the response to the other questions. That kind of links me to this question that has the 6 slides, which is the progress of the Western Balkans countries towards meeting the EU membership criteria. In bottom line, if we take a look at the situation a decade or even more ago, you would have found much more clearly pro-European orientation across these countries. The more there is a delay in the process, the more this is perceived as a process that's not based on merits, the more you create a space for people such as possibly President Vučić, who you referred to actually navigate between the double standards sometimes, or the stability argument that I think Ilir mentioned, and the domestic scene, and to also abuse the public opinion many times, or steer public opinion from the European agenda. And this is something that also Manuel referred to in terms of the division within Serbia. But if we take a look at North Macedonia actually has a very high approval rate of European accession. It has, yes, I know mostly we use the name of actually the country that's changed its constitutional name internally for the purpose of continuing in its EU accession process, in addition to other international organizations such as NATO. So it is perceived as the country that has given a lot, that it's the good pupil, in which pro-European governments have often associated themselves their own agenda or their own political survival to the EU. But at many times it was seen that the EU did not actually reciprocate. This is the country that is the best, that is aligned with EU legislation, as comparable as Serbia and Montenegro, that are negotiating for more than a decade without having started the accession negotiations, which means that it did a lot in advance. Now, the example of North Macedonia being stuck is very illustrative for the other leaders in the region not to be working on the European accession reforms, because at oftentimes more nationalistic agendas bring more votes. It's very easy to be a populist leader in these circumstances of post-conflict, and it was seen that for many of the political actors, the pro-European orientation was not the winning strategy on many of the elections, and I think these are the actors that you referred to. But just to end up here on this last point, the more the European Union is actually seen as a hesitant actor, as a hesitating in terms of potential accession or the credibility of the membership, the more it will also create space for actors such as these to build their anti-European, or not that much anti-European, but very hesitant Europeans as they are.
Thanks. Manuel, perhaps on this point, but then on Kosovo.
Well, the question is totally fair and fine, but somehow I also feel the heartbeat to defend the Western Balkans, because I totally share the view that there's a problem behind this description, but it's not in the way that only in the Western Balkans we have anti-European governments taking over. When was the last pro-European government in the UK? Oh, I don't remember really, actually. In Germany, of course, always. But if you look into detail, you would even perhaps find some critical points about German government sometimes. So I don't want to compare this one-to-one, but I always think it's good when we also give to the Western Balkans the impression that we also clean up in front of our own door, and not only put our problems and our skepticism onto the door. Some long time ago, a Polish today opposition politician once said to me, the Germans also want us to be romantic about European Union, but themselves they want to have like credible economical arguments and be very mind-driven. This is sometimes, I think, quite clear. Second point is, listen, I mean, the first country where a former communist party leader took over the government again was Lithuania, and I think it was in '92 even already. Yeah, which is quite funny because I mean this was for sure a post-communist who just changed the window dressing for own survival. But anyway, Lithuania was brought into a much more successful path forward than in that time Bulgaria or Romania or Albania have been driven. If you remember the turmoil in 1997, and this 3 countries actually. So sometimes I believe it's a mixture of not the same colonial experience in that sense, then not so close to Russia, so not with this urgent security need, which is like overwhelming all arguments. And then also, you know, the concept of enlargement in the Central Europe was quite clear. First, Coca-Cola comes in, and then the European values come second. And this was quite magically working, that the mindset was changed by the new freedoms of capitalism. Not for everybody, of course. There are also losers in that countries, but in general. And then the Western Balkans, first, it was not so, except Albania, not so closed than like before Soviet or Soviet area states. Second, Coca-Cola is already in for a long, long time because we're already having 30 years after 1990. So, you know, like it went in and it went out again to a certain extent, the mindset. These are perhaps only explanations and not giving the real answer. I can just say that 10 years ago, we were more powerful. And I think we have to first build back the credibility of enlargement by delivering. And then, you know, we will see some effects. And we're in a situation that already small points can deliver some hope. On the other hand, I think Simonida or Harun said before, the leaders felt quite comfortable also with not having the need to deliver changes from European Union, because they thought it's only on paper. But now a lot of people leave because they want to live like we do, not only regarding economy or wages, also regarding structures and institutions. So perhaps it was also a mistake from the leaders in the Western Balkans, which they see now with this huge, massive leaving of people.
Harun, would you like to chip in on this particular point before I go back to Manuel on his Serbia questions? No, you're fine.
Yeah, maybe just briefly. So I would just briefly say, you know, that, you know, the more the European Union is heading towards a strategic autonomy and, you know, not only basically relying on its soft power and financial packages, the more influence it will also have in the Western Balkans. And I think this time will surely definitely come. It's only a matter of time, you know. And I mean, just very briefly, you know, I mean, I think still the most in the most countries of the Western Balkans, you know, the people, the citizens are mainly for the EU integration, and you know, the support is, I would say, overwhelming in the most of the countries. Also, when you look at statistics, I mean, when you look at Bosnia, I mean, the support is growing. I mean, more in the one entity, Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and less in the other entity, the Republika Srpska. But it's still very much okay when you look at the whole country. You know, each year it's I think about something around 60-70%. So I mean, but just to, you know, I mean, why the people are basically also disappointed. You know, you had we had several dates until now. We had the Jean-Claude Juncker Commission, which you know, promised integration until 2025, and we now can see that this probably won't happen. I mean, okay, we're talking about Montenegro, which you have some voices who say that when the new commission or the new after the elections in the EU, that the first country which will access is Montenegro, but we still don't have we still don't know how the commission will look like. So basically, you have lots of promises which weren't fulfilled, like Simonida and also Manuel said. But the region has to have a meaningful goal on the path towards the full membership. And I think that this gradual accession model is a chance, to change some things, to have the single market membership, to regain for the EU to regain its credibility, to reform itself, for the Western Balkans to get an observer status. So I think, lots of things can be changed, but it needs time, and I think now is the time to start changing.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to those gradual integration issues later, but I first wanted to ask a question from Slido to Manuel, as I said, very specifically. What is your government efforts at the moment to lessen the tensions between Kosovo and Serbia? And would you agree to the characterization that the EU's reaction towards Kosovo in particular is legitimate or not? Do you think there's a real European foreign policy here to dispute resolution or not? 3 questions in one.
Well, I think that there are 2 points to raise regarding this very, very, very dangerous situation in North Mitrovica. First, we need de-escalation now. And it is in reality in the way that every day something can happen. Every day something can happen which will lead into new bloodshed or even perhaps into somebody's killed. And I think it's really the stupid sentence of both sides need to urgently de-escalate somehow is suddenly true in this situation. And this is how I mean it. So we have the 3 points on the table given by you. And I hope that we will find a way how to go forward with concrete steps of de-escalation. For example, under auspices of Miro Lajčák. Second is that if it's in the way that the actors try to play on status quo by having some trouble so that they don't have to go forward with implementation of Ohrid, we may not step into the trap. And we have to ask for implementation and agreement on implementation roadmap of the Ohrid agreement. This is also linked, of course, to both sides. I think what we see is that first time in world history in this situation, the US is kind of, European Union is Batman and the US is Robin in this situation, which is, I think, remarkably. But now, of course, it's also necessary to show the results. My personal problem is, if you saw in the past, Serbia as a status quo player, with, by all respect, from Serbian perspective, to a certain extent, reasonable arguments, which in the end I would not follow because I think also Serbia doesn't have the time, but I can understand that politicians or even people in Serbia don't see the urgent need to change their policy regarding recognition from like domestic atmosphere. I saw Kosovo the opposite, trying to be the driver. But this willingness of risking bloodshed in a situation which has on a long run a lot of different parts of responsibility or even guilt. But when in the end, if you have all of this situation and aspects seeing on the ground, the freedom to choose, risking or not, I think it's not the right way towards European Union to risk a bloodshed for other political purposes. And this is bringing a split between the pro-Western and pro-EU government of Kosovo and the West and the EU. And on the long run, this cannot work out. We need to have another policy approach in Pristina than the one which Pristina is accusing Serbia of having. Although I know that this is sometimes unfair. Yeah. And for a society coming out of that, what Kosovo lived through and since 1999 included, but also the time before, especially difficult and not easy. But of course, yes, our moral wishes towards Kosovo are sometimes perhaps even higher than towards Belgrade. And this is perhaps unfair, but also showing that we have a different approach on what we expect in a positive sense as well.
And
every day I get some email to the current situation on the ground, and every day there is a risk assessment, what can happen today. People in Mitrovica on both sides of the river are living since November at least now in a situation which is not normal, which is under emergency, to a certain extent under emergency measures. And this is not good for the psychology of a community, of both, of all ethnic backgrounds. And I think we urgently need to find a way to get this big split and this big radicalization which can take place on both sides due to this conflict stopped, halted.
Very briefly, Manuel, you said Lajčák is in the driving seat as far as the EU is concerned. What's the federal government of Germany's contribution, your own contribution in this respect? Can you give a glimpse behind the scenes for the citizens participating in the dialogue?
Well, we are the strongest and the most powerful European member state, the biggest one, perhaps even the most beautiful, which is not recognized yet. So it's from utmost importance that especially such a big and powerful European member state is standing behind the European institutions and not building up bypasses or stuff, because then we would only even not solve it, but for sure weaken the European Union, which would be a Pyrrhus seek, a Pyrrhus victory. I think it's important that we not only look at Kosovo, the implementation of Ohrid agreement must be secured and must be also held tight towards both sides.
Okay, I see that in the meantime, Dasha Silovic has asked for the floor. So Dasha, if you could please unmute yourself and ask your question or make your observation. Now's the moment.
Thank you very much. And I am a bit of an outsider in this because I see that everyone knows everybody. I would just like to start by telling Manuel. Manuel, I spoke with Jeffrey Sachs quite recently, who was the economic advisor to Prime Minister Markovic in 1988 and 89, when the dinar became convertible and when the Yugoslavia asked for 450 million Deutschmarks at that point to get it out of the economic situation, and it wasn't granted the money. But there was talk of starting an association agreement with the European Union, therefore before the 90s. So it takes two to tango. I think it was our North Macedonian colleague who mentioned the complacency in the resolution of the conflict and the war in the 90s, including the Kosovo issue, has left a mark. And the region is still bound in still in tatters over that. And the complacency was in the way the resolution of the conflict were done, where we are feeling the effects in the 30s, 30 years down the road. So complacency today we have, and I think our North Macedonian colleague mentioned Croatia. I'm right now sitting in Croatia. Croatia has done big strides, but the EU is seen as a cash cow. This is done with EU money, this is done with EU money, these are EU projects, this is that and that. And yet the current government, which is very much in the eyes and the hearts of Brussels, has had more than 18, I think about 20 something ministers and high-level political government officials indicted for corruption, including with embezzling European Union money. So what have we done? The complacency has led us to a situation where we have a number of countries from Bulgaria, Romania, and so on that have remained or have continued being corrupt. Money is being wasted, and yet that bears on the EU accession in general. At the same time, a high-level Montenegrin diplomat and very high-level official has told me that one of the problems was that there were a lot of consultants from the European Commission coming to Montenegro to give their advice, but they were below par. And there was a sort of a tiredness of these governments and basically apathy of not listening to the advice. At the same time, I was in Belgrade quite recently, and I was taken aback by an ad by the European Union delegation on why the Serbs should join the European Union. There were 3 speakers on the video, all in their mid-50s, I would say, saying, together we are stronger. And that was the only message. That's not the message to the people. And as somebody said, it seems that we are waltzing, and we are facing the music and waltzing, 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards. At the same time, the whole thing with Ukraine and the potential complacency around the accelerated accession because of the geopolitical situation with Ukraine and now Georgia, etc., is really, in a way, seen by many high-level politicians in the region as a slap in the face. We've been there, we've been trying to negotiate, yes, there are absolutely structural problems, and because we have been building a house without foundation. And again, to Manuel, Coca-Cola was in Yugoslavia back in the 70s, and Pepsi-Cola, and so was bacon and whatever you had to buy. So, and there was no visa regime with all European Union countries. So let's, one should have a perspective. Therefore, I think what is not present, for instance, is a discussion on the European Union. Somebody asked a question on what will happen with the European Parliament elections. Well, at this point, the polls don't seem to be very favorable in terms of who's going to have the upper hand in the European Parliament. Is that going to change? I think it will. So I think it does take two to tango. I think the European Union has to be much more strategic, much more clear. And at the same time, the way we deal with the media and the advocacy around that has to be fact-based, has to be people-based, and has to be open, and not a bureaucratic response of article this and article that. And thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Dasha. That's a forceful rebuttal, perhaps, to some of the statements which have been made, but also in line with what Simonida and Harun were pointing out. Manuel, you are the representative of an EU member state here, so I feel it's your task indeed to respond.
My problem is that the acoustics were very bad. I can just say 2 points because I really didn't got all of the points. That's exactly my point. It was for the parts which were Yugoslavian, the openness was much earlier. So this Coca-Cola point from Sarajevo doesn't work. Did you know, Stevens, that until 1991, Sarajevo was a military zone, so it was totally closed. Nobody could even go there. And now you can have nice holidays there. It's different, of course, than it was in former Yugoslavia. Second point, the Serbs, I don't know if I got it right. The question is how the Serbs, should the Serbs at all be invited? Yeah, Stephen, was that the question more or less?
I think the emphasis really of the observations revolved more about the EU's strategic communication towards the countries of the Western Balkans. No bureaucratic responses, but really forthright,
So first, I
actions.
believe that the problem in this enlargement process is also, but not the decisive problem, is the bureaucracy. Simonida's country has not been blocked by bureaucracy so often. And I won't go too far because I'm the representative of a German government, so of a member state. But the big problem for the big blockages is not the bureaucracy. Sometimes perhaps the bureaucracy is not blocking enough even. But when the European Union enlargement policy has always been in the hand of the bureaucracy since 1970s, since de Gaulle blocked 2 times the UK, for a good reason. When the council is the strongest part, it will be always dangerous that it will be too many political blockages on. This is why we need a good working commission under strong commitment of the member states and control. But it will never work that the council takes over negotiations again, for example. Regarding strategic communication, you are all right. I can just say that strategic communication of European Union somehow is always very bad. Also in member states. And not only in those member states like Bulgaria, Hungary, or Poland, even in Germany. The magnificent spell of Europe, of European Union, is working out by rules which are yet not received in the public sphere of public communication quite a lot. This is perhaps a reason why bureaucracy is also then not the problem. Yeah. I think it's quite clear, to put the Serbia example again. You know, I usually say this in Kosovo. In 1990, which countries had an interest and were in favor of the German reunification? It was not really France. It was not really UK. Some people in Germany think it was Gorbachev, but actually he just needed money. But it was, for example, the opposition in Poland taking over the country. So how would you think, Kinder, ich bin hier noch gerade am Machen. How would you think, yeah, geht zu Jonte. Sorry, my kids. How would you think they should react on Germany, which invaded them, doing genocide and Holocaust on the ground? Germany not accepting the borders until 1990, not talking about reparations, but they were in favor of reunification. So why was that? Well, they knew Poland would be only free if Eastern Germany is in the European Union and in the NATO. No Russian soldiers anymore there. So the biggest interest in having Serbia not falling out of the European train is actually in Kosovo, perhaps even more than in Serbia. When Serbia stays or gets more open for Russian influence, for Chinese influence, for anti-Western stuff, it's the biggest danger for Kosovo. And I understand that Kosovo is not yet in the position to like be nice to Serbia out of own strategic wisdom, because Serbia is quite the opposite towards Kosovo as well. And I think we have to think about that. Western Balkans need, of course, also to be aware of there's a huge thing to do with Serbia. This argument shall not lead into this direction of this is why we have to give them all and to accept the Vabonk. No, I think to get Serbia towards European Union, success of other states and a common tactics of all the others is necessary, so that the argument you cannot be the only ones not going is decisive. But also for that, we need other governments who are closely coordinating with us and not all doing usually what is right to stay together. Not also working on actually splitting.
Thanks, Manuel. I'm having a look at the clock and time is marching on. I would like to pose the third question to the audience via Slido. In your opinion, what are the biggest long-term benefits for both the EU member states and the Western Balkan countries resulting from the integration of the Western Balkans into the EU. And you can choose up to 3 answers from the following list: enhanced economic cooperation, expansion of the single market was alluded to, strengthened regional stability, enhanced security cooperation, knowledge sharing and capacity building, strengthened democracy and governance, cultural exchange and cooperation, or perhaps you don't know, or you think that there are no benefits and you can click there too. So 3 answers maximum that you can choose from. Well, I would like to ask in parallel the same question to our 3 experts. We're starting with Harun this time, while you keep an eye out for the results of the survey.
Sure. Well, I would say definitely strengthened regional stability, because it's necessary when you're a part of a union, be it the European Union, be it the Eurasian Union, be it every other union. You have to get closer to your neighbors, or not even the neighbors, to also to other countries which are in that union. Of course, in some sense, open borders, etc. Institutional cooperation. But I mean, to say that kind of on this ideologic kind of level that the cooperation is going to be better in terms of like a good example is Hungary and Romania, and all the kind of bilateral issues that they have on this level. I don't think it's necessary, necessarily that within the European Union the relations between the countries in the region will be better, but on this institutional level and cooperational level, sure, definitely very important. Of course, democracy and governance, it goes with the with the reforms, with the laws, which will be will have to be adopted on our way to the European Union, and some of them are already adopted, of course, depending on the country, and that depending on the country, but in general, yeah, democracy and governance. And I wouldn't say enhanced security cooperation. I mean, it's more a NATO thing. I would say, within the NATO to strengthen security. And we all know that the European Union isn't really a security actor, except PESCO and various programs that we have. It's that part of the union's work isn't that developed. But I would say third, enhanced economic cooperation and expansion of the single market. So these are the 3 kind of fields where I see the most development. Okay,
Simonida?
For the Western Balkan states, I think that primarily, if we go back to understanding EU membership as having gone through a process of accession which transforms countries, because it's not necessary that if we talk about membership in 2 or 3 years, that this will be the case. So if we actually go to a conventional understanding that these countries will undergo a transformative process of membership, then they will have strengthened democracy and governance and enhanced economic cooperation and even development, pure economic development, because this is what we expect also from the accession to the Union itself. As for the EU, I think it will complete the puzzle. Maybe sometimes more people in Europe should actually look at the map to see how small this region is, of 15, probably 16 million people engulfed by the European Union member states, and probably using Manuel's logic, then it's in the EU's interest for us to be stable and to be in the European Union as well as their immediate neighbor, rather than to have a hole within the Union itself. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a smaller investment in the long term, to actually assist these countries to transform and to achieve stability for the broader union itself. Because if we deal with some of the internal problems, which are often linked to the problems in the European Union, then Europe will also be a safer place.
Okay, and your three biggest long-term benefits for both the EU as well as the Western Balkan states?
Standards. I think, I mean, it sounds crazy, but the internal market is genius and it's about standards. So the people in the Western Balkans could have share of our standards in all the various branches. And for us also, it means Western Balkans will share our standards, which is important. For example, in environment, the pollution from Western Balkans doesn't stop there, you know? There are some chemicals coming out from energy production Western Balkans, which are polluting the whole continent, actually. And the third one is European Union is a family which is saving US sometimes. It's always good to be in one, especially when you have none in the region, or not really. And perhaps to say this one, when somebody's ass has to be saved in Europe, Germany is always taking the biggest share. But we want to be inside because we are also the biggest beneficiary of European Union. So it shows that if you do something for European Union, even if at short time it's not showing like benefits in the economical sense, perhaps on the long run it will. And this security, this irreversibility of a past, this is quite good. Listen, guys, I was last time in Poland, I was talking to some PiS people and I asked them, you still want to make Pole exit? Because now it would be fine. It was a joke, of course, yeah? Because now it would be fine. You're now so powerful. Perhaps it would be good if now you leave. And they said clearly, no. In the moment would be very unfortunate to leave because in the moment we are so powerful inside European Union. You see, the magics of European Union, it's stopping nowhere. Listen, my kids have to go to bed. I hope I could help you having a great panel. Thank you for organization. And I would already get out and try to get my kids sleeping, if that's okay.
Thanks, Manuel, for joining and your candid responses, sometimes verging on the undiplomatic, which is nice, of course, in the citizens' dialogue. So thanks very much for your contribution and enjoy the rest of the evening. The final question is, in fact, I think also more geared towards the other two panelists, which revolves around the role of civil society organizations, citizens of the Western Balkans more generally, also the EU, of course, and the role they can play in the promotion and monitoring of the integration process. Could I get your short answers? Maybe Harun first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, very, very briefly, you know, a strong civil society is important. I think in the Western Balkans in general, I don't know if Simonida agrees, but we definitely have a strong civil society. I mean, that's one of the, I think, positive, you know, sides of our countries. So to say. So I think maybe the civil society doesn't get that much attention, or sometimes the civil society actors are kind of used also from the side of the political actors, but also you know, from the EU, so kind of to you know, to promote the EU integration process, and you know, but doesn't let the civil society kind of doesn't let us in, or basically, how to say, doesn't maybe give us enough spaces to express our kind of doubts, etc. But you know, I feel that the civil society is strong. They're already, you know, also within the Berlin process, there are you know, some opportunities for the civil society to engage and through some other, you know, other processes. But yeah, it's just important that the civil society in general isn't just you know, kind of tick the box tool, but you know, a real actor, a strong one. And I think the civil society will you know, also in the future contribute to the, you know, changing of the political developments, and to, you know, contribute to the EU process in general.
Thanks. Simonida?
The nature of civil society is such that it's very, very difficult to actually generalize because it's a diverse, I would not even say a group, it's a diverse stakeholder in society. But in any case, in these very polarized settings in which we live, I think there's a big function for it to actually provide space for dialogue in many cases, but also to chip in on something that was mentioned in the questions as to the strategic communication of the Union. And I'm sorry, I can't remember, it was Asha Silovic that mentioned this, because I think that there is a role here for civil society to maybe sometimes unpack the bureaucratic language of the Union and to assist in this communication, sometimes more successfully, sometimes less, in addition to the role that you already mentioned in terms of monitoring and so on. I come from an expert organization, and unfortunately in a lot of this region, actually a lot of the expertise lies in civil society because of the non-merit approach that sometimes the state administration has, but this allows civil society maybe more freedom to actually for expression and for a more nuanced understanding of the accession to the Union that we may have.
Thanks, Simonida. Okay, with that, we have exhausted our time, but I would be remiss not to note that, as I mentioned at the outset, the Citizens Dialogue on EU accession of Ukraine will be the next one in this series. The date still has to be confirmed, but it's probably going to be mid or end of July. There's a link for more information about the Citizens Dialogue on EU accession of Ukraine you can find in the chat. If you want to stay informed about future citizen dialogues, then you can also register for the EUD newsletter by writing an email to burgerdialogue@europa-union.de. The email is also in the chat. It remains for me to thank, of course, our experts, Simonida, Kacarska, Harun, Cero, and no longer with us, at least virtually in the Zoom call, Manuel, Sarrazin. Thank you very much for your contributions. Of course, thanks very much to all our participants for their interventions as well, your questions through Slido. The podcast on all three citizens' dialogues about EU enlargement will be published in September after the summer, and then there will be a possibility to listen to the citizens' dialogues again on YouTube. Please, there's also evaluation questions that will be displayed here on Zoom after the end of this webinar. So an important request to those still online to fill out those questions. That feedback is needed to improve our citizens dialogues in the future. So with that, thank you very much for tuning in, and see you for the next citizens dialogue about EU enlargement. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.